been sort of an epidemic of recent within cinema. Many people are tuning in to watch movies more and more nowadays to see things that seem sort of antithetical to the whole point of cinema. Cinema is a storytelling medium. It's about bringing you into a world by laying it out in front of you, then introducing you to some characters, make you like them, make them suffer, before eventually giving them a satisfying resolution. But now more and more we are witnessing people coming to the theatres and streaming films for superficial, mind-numbing reasons. I want to preface this by saying, in spite of the intro, I really don't actually care about what you personally enjoy when it comes to watching films. If you enjoy a bad movie, then great, more power to you. My issue is the effect it is having on the perception of the industry and the approach that studios take to making movies moving forward. Now, sex is something that's very marketable, something that I've discussed before, but I want to go into more detail about why I think the appeal to specifically sex in movies is such an issue. Now, I've spoken about my hatred of Euphoria before, and it is still raging and passionate. The third season of Euphoria is now said to be the last of the show, which, when I read it, made me scream hallelujah. The show's quality has been universally stated to have decreased season by season, and this final season seemed to be the last straw. I think the reason for this failure is the lack of a coherent story arc and character depth. Season 1 was superficial and shallow, as I've already pointed out, but it did have some semblance of a plot, some very good performances, and I'll admit some pretty incredible cinematography. The writers clearly have no plan moving forward with later seasons. Due to their lack of foresight, everything in the show is just turned up to 11 as a means of covering up for the lack of story. Cassie's character is a perfect example of how the show is just reliant on lust and how it ruined the show. It's maybe a hot take, but I find Sydney Sweeney to be a very attractive woman, and I'm not the only man who thinks that. Because of this, some of the scenes did appeal to me on a surface level. When you really dig deeper into the story, you see there really is no interesting character growth or journey. It's all just shock and sexualization. I feel like the whole show was sort of built around Sydney Sweeney as she became more and more prevalent in the show, and they just wanted to see how far they could make her go in the name of art, and it's not even really art, it's just porn at this point. And then you've got whatever the fuck is going on with the Jacobs family. Again, it's just more shock value and low effort attempt to appeal to some immature inclinations we have to be intrigued by sexual activity, you know, whether it's Nate's dad having sex with dudes or whatever. It's just so like one note and transparent and shit. It's all just totally reliant on the sex appeal of the cast and the young audience's sexual fantasies and curiosities. Throughout the show, they touch on every sexual act an interested person can have. They do cheating, sex work, kinks, homosexuality, and it's not done in a tasteful or interesting way that would advance a plot. It's very clearly done just as a wide casting net to try and appeal to every viewer's animalistic impulses. The reason I say lust ruined this show is because there was a chance of the show really achieving something significant. It has a truly stacked cast and fills a hole in the market for a modern day edgy teen drama. And it has moments of good dialogue and impressive performances, but the writers just seem to throw away any interesting plot points they could have developed, and instead favoured superficial sex scenes and overtly explicit dialogue that makes every character just thoroughly unlikable and the story completely flat and uninteresting. By the end of its run, the entire show was basically just a long-form porno with the occasional fight scene and better acting. No real substance at all. You know, they've got the pimp who's just got surrounded by naked women, Maddie who's always half naked, Cassie who's naked more than she's clothed. It's so on the nose and unnecessary. And the problem is this style of shock value writing, unfortunately, has proven to be successful as Euphoria, despite being a show with no real plot or story, had 3 seasons and amassed a giant following, simply because it contained scenes and dialogue that was so in your face and shocking that it kept those who are solely interested in either sex or have a morbid curiosity in the lives of other people to keep watching. It's the opposite of what cinema is supposed to be. Like I said, it's a storytelling medium, but when it is as popular as it is, it's going to stick around because there's money to be made. This movie was such a confusing mess. The film was written and directed by Emerald Fennell, who also made Saltburn and has been a close collaborator with the head Euphoria writer, Sam Levinson. It's very easy to see Levinson's inspiration in Emerald's work. They both love Jacob Elordi, have very similar in-your-face dialogue about very weird things, and they both are absolutely so fucking horny all the goddamn time. Emerald's two biggest movies are very similar in a lot of ways. They are both very good to look at from time to time, with big colourful sets that look like something out of a Wes Anderson movie, but they're both equally flat and dull. I heard a lot of people describe this film as hollow, and I think that's a perfect description. I think outside of the sex appeal of the two leads and the raunchy dialogue, there really is nothing going on here. It's just two Australians with bad Yorkshire accents getting horned up for like 2 hours. This is less in your face than in the case of Euphoria, as this movie attempts to show all this lust in a more dignified manner, but it still isn't remotely interesting outside of the vague sex appeal that the movie has. I think what was especially irritating about this instance of lust is that it was an integral part of the marketing campaign. Jacob Elordi and Margot Robbie were all over each other, like a couple of 16-year-olds on the back of a school bus who'd been dating for 2 weeks during the press for this movie, which did get people talking and definitely was a motivator for young girls to go watch this movie. But for most people who aren't teenagers and who aren't chronically online, it was a very transparent marketing scheme. Both are very clearly in relationships with other people, and while co-stars definitely do cheat with one another in movies, they usually aren't so open about it. I remember when Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell did the same thing for Anyone But You a few years ago, which was another vapid, lustful cash grab with no substance, fake or story to speak of. Wuthering Heights, Saltburn and Anyone But You have all come out in the last couple of years, and we're seeing an escalating pattern of sex-related shock value, both in the films and their marketing. Soon the co-stars are just going to end up fucking on stage like they did in movies, and people are going to eat it up, and Stanley Kubrick will roll in his grave. Okay, maybe that was a bit too dramatic. Now, before you all freak out, this isn't a bad thing. In fact, I think Obsession is one of the few movies that tackles the topic of lust well. And it does it because it uses lust in an interesting way. Now, this movie is motivated by lust, like the others. However, Obsession does it in a far better way, as lust is an integral theme and plot point within the film. In this movie, lust isn't used as a weapon or a veil to try and cover up the absence of the substance. It is the substance, not the movie. What I love about Obsession, outside of Indy Noirette, of course, is that it flips the trope of lust on its head and gives the audience a view of the dangers of lust. We have a man who is lusting over a woman, which is both relatable to the audience as people and as audiences of movies and similar genres of recent years. It takes this lust to the extreme to show the power that these feelings can have on a person when left unchecked. There are some really interesting characters in this story, people that you actually care about. They're not perfect people, but their flaws are understandable, and we as the audience still want them to succeed. In the other movies I've discussed, I've not wanted any of the characters to do well in life because they're vapid, uninteresting people who seem entirely self-obsessed and genuinely don't care about anyone else around them. Obsession does still have a sexual appeal to it. It has some very sexual scenes and dialogue and a very attractive cast, which are all by design, and the appeal is largely towards the same audience of movies like Wuthering Heights and of shows like Euphoria. But the story drives the events of the film, not the one-dimensional motivations of the audience and the filmmaker. I think this issue has largely come up with social media, and I know how fucking old I sound when I say that, but when you have platforms that give you such an instant relief, you sort of see that out everywhere. People don't want to make long, slow-burning TV shows and movies. They want to have stuff that gives you a quick hit instantly, bam, 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 bam. And that can work as long as there's an actual interesting story behind it. And a lot of these movies just don't have that. It's just sort of like quick release, quick release, quick release, look at this, look at this, look at this, and there's just really nothing going on. I hope moving forward, the films like Obsession are the kinds of films that mainstream social media audiences are compelled to watch, rather than vapid one-note sex stories. But with how profitable those films have shown to have been, it's difficult to see large studios passing them up moving forward. I know this seemed like a dramatic video, and I was definitely amping up the drama to try and, make it more punchy and interesting. But I think the fundamental thing I'm trying to get down to is a lot of movies being made, especially for younger people, don't really seem to have an interest in storytelling or an interest in character building or world building. They just seem to want to go for vapid, one-dimensional, interesting things that you can just look at and sort of absorb without really thinking about. They don't really want movies to be watched, they want them to be seen, if that makes sense. They don't want people to really make movies that people pay attention to and people listen to. They want something that has cool scenes that you can look up at whilst you're scrolling on your phone. And hopefully movies like Obsession can use the appeal of, you know, young attractive actors and, you know, cool interesting romantic concepts to get people into movies, but they can keep a captivating enough story and characters where those people, the audience, will stick around and watch it for that rather than just vapid random sex appeal and other forms of like instant gratification. But it remains to be seen.